I think it's been a very fruitful, fascinating day's discussions. It's been a long day, but I think we've time well spent. We can easily say that. I know there was a session scheduled for a presentation from my side. I don't think we'll have time for that, but instead what I'd like to do is offer a few thoughts. And it's always hard coming after children with such touching, poignant remarks, and the song absolutely took my breath away. But first of all, I wanted to thank you all for coming, and I know there's an online audience on social media and on Facebook Live. So thank you all for joining. Your participation means the world to us at ADB. Let me just end with 4 thoughts. I think, when we think of Mongolia, we have all the images that conjure up in our mind. The awe-inspiring beauty, the grasslands, the steppes, the rich historical legacy. Genghis Khan is arguably the most prominent figure of the last millennium. And the dynamism, the resilience, the fortitude of the Mongolian people. I think there's no other way to describe it. If you look at what they had to endure and weather in terms of the transition from the early 90s. So that's a testament to all these facets. And you see that in the human development indicators, and we heard about it earlier. Almost universal primary school enrollment, adult literacy at the same level, SDG targets being exceeded in terms of infant mortality, maternal mortality, GDP figures going up 3 times over the last 20 years. Private sector footprint and contribution to GDP now stands at 80%. Very, very impressive numbers all around. But there's also another narrative that plays out, the narrative of volatility. We hear about, the average term of a government has been about 2 years historically. We also hear about the susceptibility, fragility because of the commodity price dependent economy and the pro-cyclicality of policy. But I'd like to say that these are not defining constraints. And we have concrete evidence in Mongolia of bucking the trend. We just have to look back to the last period from 2017 to 2019, when strong macroeconomic management, fiscal discipline whittled down the public debt to GDP by almost 30%, raised the savings, created more buffers. There was even a small surplus. So I don't think macroeconomic management can be looked at as something that's going to hold Mongolia back in the long term. We've seen a way forward, and it can be done. And we know that there is policy frameworks such as the fiscal stability law that allows this. And it's this discipline, it's this sound, prudent management that gave Mongolia the space to act on COVID-19. The second issue I'd like to offer is around Mongolia being a landlocked country. We heard a lot about this in the morning. And it almost sounds like it's the worst thing in the world. Frankly, if you had to be landlocked, where else to be landlocked than where Mongolia is? I mean, you're in a bustling, dynamic region, a region that's a center, a hub for free trade, investment. Mongolia is, juxtaposed between 2 neighbors. One is 600 times the size of Mongolia in terms of the economy, and another that's about 100 times the size of the economy. So you've got huge markets on both sides. And regional cooperation is an area that we've been involved in for a number of years in terms of improving border town efficiency, in terms of procedures, customs harmonization, phytosanitary, sanitary standards. So again, something that is hardwired in ADB's DNA. And we really think this is something we can continue to work with Mongolian people, Mongolian stakeholders on. The third point I think we often hear about is diversification and the dependence on, natural resource dependent economy, commodity dependent economy. And indeed, this is something that needs to be looked at from a long view. It's not something that will be addressed in the short run. We have seen in terms of the industrial output, the revenues, the long-term FDI inflows, much of this is to the extractive sector, the mining sector. And the non-mining sector exports have actually come down over the last 20 years or so. So I think this is an area, again, where we are very, very optimistic. I think there's a huge amount of potential. Only about 5% of the 500,000 tons of meat that's produced in Mongolia actually gets processed. So agribusiness, meat exports, we heard of some of the potential around traceability and the needs around that. Renewables, again, we know the numbers, 2,600 gigawatts of renewable potential. We've commissioned, or in the process of commissioning, we have approved and are tendering out a project on battery storage, which will be the largest battery storage project in the world, and which will allow the uptake of up to 44 gigawatts of renewable capacity into the central energy system that feeds Ulaanbaatar city. So I think a combination of storage, scaling up renewables, improving the grid, the flexibility of the grid will allow exports to Northeast Asia and beyond. There's considerable potential there. The last point I want to talk about is people and institutions. I think this is, and this is the future, the children who are here. And there are some issues that we need to navigate, and we all need to navigate this together. We see that poverty is still persistent, rural poverty as well as urban poverty. And the population that's on the cusp of, there's about 15% that's just outside the poverty line. So in addition to the 28.4% who fall within the national poverty line. So, there is fragility there. And we have seen, most certainly, COVID has pushed some of these people deeper into poverty. So how do we leverage and use the social welfare programs more effectively? We know that the cash transfer around the child money programs, the food stamp program was very important in buffering against some of these impacts. But now we need to transition to jobs, building more skills, looking at the TVET agenda. So areas where I think there will need to be considerable focus going forward, and ensuring that the mismatch between skills, jobs, and the labor market is addressed effectively, so that you don't see the brain drain that you see from Mongolia. We want to attract and retain much of the talent here in Mongolia. Last point to add from my side, we heard 30 years of ADB partnership. We saw the footage, the video of some of the work that we've been very privileged to work with the stakeholders in Mongolia, and the tangible results of across the board, infrastructure, social sectors, environmental work. But looking ahead, we have just approved a country partnership strategy that will go from 2021 to 2024. This will be our deepest, most substantial country partnership strategy ever in ADB's engagement. And we have committed this because we are inherently optimistic about Mongolia's prospects. And it's not just me, and I'm an optimistic person by nature, but I think the institution, we truly believe that Mongolia has huge potential and has the building blocks, the foundation to now take it to the next level. I won't go through all the projects in that space, but suffice to say, this will not happen without strong partnerships. Partnerships with the government, partnerships with the private sector, partnerships with civil society, and partnerships with development partners. Critical for achieving this. The last 2 years, we've all been mired with COVID. And for me, I think, personally, it's been a revelation. I've seen the kindness, the generosity, the dynamism of the Mongolian people, and the resilience. I mean, people I work with, people I see around me. And I think this will carry Mongolia to greater heights. This, combined with this enduring sense of pride around their culture, their history, is what we need to hold on to. So once again, Mashik Baitla, thank you all for participating, and look forward to working together, seeing you all in the near future. Baitla.